It's Riff Arcade. I'm Butts, and this is Let's Playto, the show that looks into the social, historical, and philosophical themes of your favorite games. I want to say right up front that I'm probably not good at games, and I don't have a degree in philosophy, but I hope this video will inspire you to look into these topics and games for yourself. We try to stay neutral to certain topics at Riff Arcade, and while I will do my best to maintain that, some personal opinions might slip through. Please enjoy, and be aware, spoilers incoming. Today, we're going to talk about something very central to what Riff Arcade is about. A core concept that forms the foundation of this channel. Quesadillas. Quesadillas were invented by Robert Quesadillos in 1980. No, I'm just kidding. We're not talking about quesadillas. This time. But I wasn't kidding about today's topic being central to Riff Arcade, because we're going to dive into nostalgia, or at least a very unique way of thinking about nostalgia. And that unique way of thinking comes from my favorite thinker, C.S. Lewis. Let's see here, foundational concept to the channel, personal favorite thinker. What game could possibly match the gravitas this episode needs? Well, no single game I can think of, so how about a series? I know, the Quesadilla Hunter series. But look, I know this is just a bit, but I'd play them. I'd play all of them. But seriously, will this do? That's more like it. Buckle up, you guys, because today we're going to take a small essay by C.S. Lewis and 4 Zelda games to try to rethink nostalgia. I'm so excited. This calls for a celebration! It's cheesy. So who was C.S. Lewis? Clive Staples Lewis was born in... Staples? Really? Oh well. Was born in 1898 in Belfast, Ireland. He was an extremely avid reader, immersing himself in the mythology of the Greeks, the Norse, and his native Ireland. He studied at a number of English schools and was privately tutored by his father's teacher, William Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick, who Lewis would nickname the Great Knock, sharpened Lewis's reasoning skills while also encouraging his love of mythology and literature. He was accepted into Oxford College in 1917, but was called to fight in the trenches at the Somme in France. An artillery shell misfired, injuring Lewis and killing 2 of his colleagues. He was brought back to England to recover, where he restarted his schooling, earning the equivalent of valedictorian in Greek literature, philosophy and ancient history, and English all at the same time. He's the triple threat, ladies. He became a philosophy tutor and in 1925 was given a position at Oxford's Magdalen College in English literature, which he held for 29 years. It was during his time at Magdalen that the most noteworthy parts of his life occurred. He struck up a close friendship with some nerd named J.R.R. Tolkien, and together they led an informal group of bookworms called the Inklings. It's a sweet band name. I imagine Lewis on keyboards, Tolkien also on keyboards, just all of them on keyboards. Tolkien also influenced Lewis's conversion to Christianity. And if you like Lord of the Rings, thank Lewis. It was with his help that the series, which was an idea in Tolkien's mind, got to the page. The unpayable debt that I owe to Lewis was not influence, as it is ordinarily understood, but sheer encouragement. Tolkien would later report that oftentimes, Lewis was the only person he would ever show his work to, with Lewis helping Tolkien to bring out new ideas and connections. Tolkien returned the favor by helping with Lewis's most famous work, The Chronicles of Narnia. Lewis gained more fame during World War II, when he was asked to give a series of radio talks to boost English morale. His talking notes were later worked into his other famous work, Mere Christianity. He was in such demand at this point in his life that Cambridge University literally created a new chair dedicated to medieval and Renaissance literature to lure Lewis from his beloved Oxford. And it worked. I mean, who could resist that, right? His writing slowed but never fully stopped, and he died on November 22nd, 1963 of kidney failure. Now, I love Lewis's writing style and his perspective on topics. He writes simply and clearly, and his love of the past and literature overflows. And while I feel weird calling him a philosopher, I put him in the same camp as Carl Jung. Both thinkers did a majority of their work in a different field, but brought a massive amount of philosophical and historical knowledge to that field. He wrote a huge number of small essays and articles, and while a lot of them are from a Christian point of view, I feel that many are broad enough to be required reading. You want to go into STEM fields, education, or politics? Read The Abolition of Man. Police and Armed Forces? Read The Necessity of Chivalry. All social workers and those calling for judicial reforms should read The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. And I think everyone everywhere should read essays like After Priggery, The Poison of Subjectivism, Bulverism, and On Ethics. And it's one of these simpler essays that we're going to dive into today. It's a very short essay. You can knock it out in 5 minutes. Please don't click off this video. But in typical Lewis fashion, it's the depth of the writing that's the fun part. Let's talk about bicycles. If you don't like the dry, wordy writings of old philosophers, then I seriously think you should check out some of Lewis's essays. Talking About Bicycles is a philosophical paper written by a fiction author. It's a simple conversation between friends at a pub. It could be anyone, and neither character is named. The friends are simply talking and enjoying a pint. Perhaps the starting point of the essay was even an Inklings meeting. Talking about bicycles, said my friend, I have been through the 4 ages. I can remember a time in early childhood when a bicycle meant nothing to me. It was just part of the huge, meaningless background of grown-up gadgets against which life went on. Then came a time when to have a bicycle, and to have learned to ride it, and to be at last spinning along on one's own early in the morning, under the trees, in and out of the shadows, was like entering paradise. That apparently effortless and frictionless gliding, more like swimming than any other motion, but really most like the discovery of a fifth element that seemed to have solved the secret of life. Now one would begin to be happy. But of course, I soon reached the 3rd period. Pedaling to and fro school, in all weathers, soon revealed the pros of cycling. The bicycle itself became to me what his oar is to a galley slave. But what was the 4th age, I asked. I am in it now, or rather I am frequently in it. I have had to go back to cycling lately, now that there's no car, and the jobs I use it for are often dull enough. But again and again, the mere fact of riding brings back a delicious whiff of memory. I've recovered the feelings of the 2nd age. What's more, I see how true they were, how philosophical even, for it really is a remarkably pleasant motion. To be sure, it is not a recipe for happiness as I then thought. In that sense, the 2nd age was a mirage, but a mirage of something. So right off the bat, Lewis gives us the thesis that in everything, there are 4 stages we could find ourselves in. There's a time when we don't have knowledge of something, and then we come to know it, and then we are disillusioned. And if we are lucky, we recontextualize our knowledge. I think there are these 4 ages about nearly everything. Let's give them names. They are the Unenchanted Age, the Enchanted Age, the Disenchanted Age, and the Re-enchanted Age. Oh, thank God there are some names to these. And of course, a friend of Tolkien would name them after enchantments. So there's a time in all of our lives when we are ignorant of a thing, or at least we have no direct knowledge of it. There was a time in my life when I had never played Super Metroid, and that time was every year between when I was born and 2003. But then I played Super Metroid, and I loved it. The map, the powers, the exploration, the bosses. All of it great. I became enchanted. I started looking for other games like it. But none of them could quite live up to it. I tried to chase that high I got the first time playing it. But even replays never quite captured that first feeling. So I was disenchanted. But eventually, after playing other Metroidvanias, including other Metroids and other Vanias, I saw the influence Super Metroid had. I see what those games borrowed and what they changed, and I'm often reminded of that first time I played Super Metroid. Right now, I am re-enchanted. And now that we know the 4 ages, let's look at the next part. Nostalgia. As long as there have been older people talking to younger people, the feeling of nostalgia has been around. But nostalgia as a concept actually has a starting point. Nostalgia is defined as a wistful or excessive sentimental yearning for return to or of some past period of irrecoverable condition. It's a combination of 2 Greek words, nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning pain. Pain of coming home. We all know that feeling of longing for something from our past that we want to experience again. First described in 1688 by Johannes Hofer, Hofer noticed that a lot of Swiss mercenaries who were fighting in the plains of France were getting sick easily, and they couldn't stop talking about their homes back in the mountains. These Swiss mercenaries, who absolutely should be called Swarcenaries, were diagnosed with Swiss illness. The cause? Physicians thought that the constant ringing of cows' bells in Swiss valleys caused brain damage in the Swarcenaries that caused them to long for their homeland, and I wish I could write jokes that good. It got so bad that certain Swiss songs were banned to keep the troops from deserting their posts. In 1770, one of the crew of Captain Cook's voyages wrote that many sailors were now pretty far gone with the longing for home, which the physicians have gone so far as to esteem a disease under the name nostalgia. Back then, it was seen as the same negative light of other diseases like melancholy and delusions and womanhood. During the 1800s, the Romantic movement's emphasis on individualism and subjectivism began to soften people's view on nostalgia. And by the Civil War, nostalgia was seen as less of a disease and closer to the way we think of it today. I hope there were people that were nostalgic for the old way nostalgia was thought of, just to make a nice nostalgia paradox. We are constantly swamped with nostalgia in our world. People tend to be nostalgic during times of stress and social upheaval. And I don't know if you've noticed the everything everywhere, but we have a lot of that now. What's even worse, advertisers and companies have found that appealing to nostalgia is very profitable. I mean, have they no shame? What kind of monsters would build their brand? So how does this nostalgia link to the 4 ages? Lewis actually addresses this. He thinks it is extremely important to understand what enchantment a person is in. You read an author in whom love is treated as lust, and all war is murder, and so forth. But are you reading a disenchanted man, or only an unenchanted man? Has the writer been through the enchantment to come out on the bleak highlands? Or is he simply a sub-man who is free from the love mirage as a dog is free, and free from the heroic mirage as a coward is free? If disenchanted, he may have something worth hearing to say, though less than a re-enchanted man. If unenchanted, into the fire with his book. He is talking of what he does not understand. That's a strong reaction coming from someone so well-read as Lewis. Nostalgia, like anything, can be subject to the 4 ages. The enchanted people who just can't seem to let go of their glory days in high school. They talk about back in my day and just want to get back to the past and live there, as if the past were an actual place to go and they were just waiting to save up for a ticket. Those folks who think everything from the past was a mistake, or that looking to the past for answers is foolish, are disenchanted. You've begun to suspect that those moments, of which memory is so ravishing, weren't at the time quite so wonderful as they seem now. You're right. they weren't. Each great experience is a whisper, which memory will warehouse as a shout. But what then? Isn't the warehousing just as important a fact as anything else? Isn't the true mark of the re-enchanted to be able to not be blinded by either faults or joys of the past? To know that the enchantment was a mirage, but to see everything that came from it. To celebrate nostalgia, while still not willing it to overtake the present. This is particularly hard for gamers, because everything is seen through the lens of what has come before. But once you get a grasp of the four ages, you see them everywhere in the gaming world. A parents group yelling about violence in video games is Unenchanted. They are correct, there is violence in games, but since they do not play or interact with those games, they do not know what they are talking about. When you talk to someone who thinks the latest Call of Duty is the best game ever made, they are enchanted. They only have positive things to say because that's all they can see. Well, they certainly have never seen a real battlefield. Certain reviewers like Zero Punctuation are disenchanted. They have played so many games that didn't live up to their own hype that no game for them will ever be good again. But talk to a retro game lover, and you might get lucky and find someone re-enchanted. They agree that those games are hard, the controls are difficult, the design is flawed, but they also see the value of the games. They want to praise what is praiseworthy about the games, in spite of, but not ignoring, the flaws. Okay, enough stalling. How does this all come together with Legend of Zelda? Well, if you want to understand Zelda, you have to understand nostalgia. Zelstalgia? Not quite. Zelda was built on it. Series creator Shigeru Miyamoto flat out tells us, "When I was younger, I grew up in the countryside of Japan. And what that meant was I was spending a lot of my time playing in the rice paddies and exploring the hillside and having fun outdoors. And I drew upon that inspiration when we were working on Legend of Zelda games, and we were creating this outdoor adventure. And so it was around that time that I really began to start drawing on my experience as a child and bringing that into game development." It was looking back on his childhood and, even knowing those adventures weren't really that exciting, trying to recapture the fun of exploring, that led Shigeru Miyamoto to create Zelda. So, knowing how important nostalgia is to Zelda, and how important it is which age the nostalgia is from, let's see some examples from the series. This might be kind of controversial, but I would say the first game in the series is Unenchanted. It's the first, so obviously it doesn't have anything else to build off of. It would go on to establish the tropes and through lines of the series, but it doesn't know what the series will become. If Zelda is built on nostalgia, Nostelda? Still no. Then this is just walking around the woods and getting an idea of the terrain. Most gamers played it and thought it was fine, good enough to give it another game in the series. The next one, though, that's where the magic happened. No, not you. Try again. There we go. This game is legendary. This is where everyone fell in love with the series. And it's easy to see why. The game looks great, it's fun to play, and you really feel like you're on a grand adventure. This is Enchantment. Playing this game must have made everyone feel like this is what gaming was going to be. That every Zelda will be like this. I have to admit, the game that enchanted me was actually Ocarina of Time, but I would argue that Ocarina did for 3D what Link to the Past did for 2D. Whichever game pulled you in, you thought it was always going to be grand like this. But of course, things didn't go that way. Now, hear me out. I love Wind Waker. I played it over the course of a band camp during college. I will defend Wind Waker, but I can't defend it against the disenchantment that it has become for the series. It seemed like everything was changed. The art was changed to be cartoony, the heroes even called Toon Link. The medieval aesthetic was changed to a pirate seafaring one. Hyrule was submerged, so familiar locations couldn't really be used. The climax of the game is to destroy the Hyrule you explored in Ocarina. Even the thrill of exploring and wandering around was replaced by this. The Zelda team went hard in the other direction with Twilight Princess, but Wind Waker is where the disenchantment is most easily seen. The Zelda I'll get there, was gone. Or was it? Breath of the Wild is a modern-day masterpiece. The fact that there are no loading screens in the overworld is astonishing. You can literally climb anything, go anywhere, try anything. Gameplay-wise, this game is a triumph. It's even more impressive when you look at how the Zelda formula was changed. There are no proper dungeons in Breath. 0. The Divine Beasts are the closest thing, and they're more like giant puzzle rooms with a big fight at the end. I mean, I guess technically that's what dungeons are. But the Divine Beasts are much smaller and self-contained. There's no hook shot, there's no proper boomerang. All the tools to beat the game are given in the first 2 hours. The Triforce is only ever hinted at, and even then just barely. So why is Breath considered a masterpiece of Zelstalgia? Oh god, they're getting worse. Because Breath of the Wild returns to what the series is about. Exploration. Laying out a giant world and telling the player, go nuts. Pretty much everyone who has played this game has said they eventually took a break from the main quest to just wander off. This game fulfills the promise that Link to the Past was hinting at. It wasn't the dungeons, or the tools, or the graphics, or even Hyrule or the Triforce that we loved. Now we understand what Miyamoto was trying to inspire in his games. Every trope and throughline established way back in the first Zelda was just trying to get us there. I'm not saying no Zelda will ever be better than Breath of the Wild, which got a sequel, but I am saying the team that created Breath of the Wild knew what made a Zelda game great and how it makes the player feel. That feeling of nostalgia. Yes! There it is! I knew we'd get there. Whew, this was a long one today, but I wanted to get all this out because seeing the 4 ages and things is a great tool to have in our everyday lives. As gamers especially, we are constantly interacting with things from the past. We tend to hold older games in higher esteem than newer ones. We talk about how terrible Game X is because it doesn't hold up to the original, then in 3 years we decry the next game for not holding up to the standard of Game X. We demand novelty, but don't you dare change anything. As gamers, we need to remember that no game is ever going to be perfect. All the hype and promises made by the game won't ever be fulfilled. But that doesn't mean that failing to meet those promises makes those games a failure. I hope that this video has given everyone a new perspective on nostalgia, and that knowing the 4 ages of enchantment can help everyone navigate things even away from games. Isn't it immensely important to distinguish unenchantment from disenchantment, and enchantment from re-enchantment? The great danger we have to guard against in this age is the unenchanted man mistaken himself for, and mistaken by others, for the disenchanted man. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and like if you want to see more. Check out more videos and streams on YouTube or Facebook by searching for Riff Arcade. We publish new videos every Monday, Wednesday, plus a stream every Thursday.